Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Felicia Passano, and I'm with the New York State Tug Hill Commission. On behalf of Lisa from Zelvin Security and the Tug Hill Commission, we welcome you to Strong Cybersecurity Practices. In this webinar, Lisa will present on the 2021 threat landscape in the cybersecurity world, including how cyber criminals are attacking public and private organizations. The presentation will explore practical steps you can take to reduce your risk of a cyber attack, the pillars of a strong cybersecurity posture, and how to improve your resiliency against hackers in wild. A few housekeeping tips. You're all muted to reduce background noise, but if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and Lisa will be answering them throughout the presentation. And we also are recording this webinar, and it'll be posted to our website in the next few days. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Felicia, and thank you on behalf of Zelvin Security. I'm happy to be here to speak to folks from the Tug Hill Commission. Cybersecurity is on everyone's mind these days, and there are many things that we can do to help protect our organization and businesses and help make it more difficult for hackers in the wild to compromise your systems and your data. So this evening, we'll talk about those pillars and we'll talk about resiliency against cyber attacks. But what I would like to do, I know there is just a small group, but if you would, in the chat, please write down something that you would like to learn this evening. We did this earlier today when we hosted this webinar, and we had some great feedback and we were able to answer everybody's questions. So please type something that brought you here today and why you tuned in. So let me tell you a little bit about Zelvin Security. So we are a proactive cybersecurity service business. So businesses basically hire us to hack into them and tell them how sophisticated a hacker might need to be in order to compromise their system. So we do this by testing their network. We test web applications where most of your business data is probably held. And we also do some compliance and consulting work. What we do is we perform tests based on the scope of services that are identified prior to the test. And then we help the business or organization by identifying ways in which they can improve their security posture. We try to think about security as a security-minded approach from the foundation up, and not just bolting on or spending more money on shiny devices and security that you buy out of a box. We try to really help organizations fix systemic problems so that they can really become hardened both on the outside of their organization and the outside of their network and on the inside of their network. Our business is headquartered south of Syracuse. We are Central New York based, and we've served clients since 2002. So for about the past 18 years, many of our clients are all over the US, and we also have some folks here in our backyard. Some of those businesses are healthcare organizations, financial and mortgage businesses, manufacturing, online retail, which I think every business seems to be online these days, and insurance industry, and then also the enterprises, so resorts and some of the bigger businesses. So the interesting thing about what we do is we help businesses comply with regulations and privacy standards, and we help them address their risks from a systemic process like we talked about just a second ago, but we can do this from anywhere in the world. So when COVID happened and everybody went remote, we were already remote. And when we begin to serve a client, what we do is we send them a kit that we mail to their place of business. They connect the kit, and then we are able to work from our offices and work within their offices seamlessly. So it doesn't disrupt us that COVID happened, and we are able to keep moving along and keep businesses working on their security posture. There have been a number of confirmed data breaches in the healthcare industry, and in 2020, there was an increase by 58%. And 93% of healthcare organizations has experienced a data breach in the last 3 years. Manufacturing companies, they account for nearly 25% of all ransomware attacks. So these things are really happening. There's a number of unemployment applicants that were exposed. There was a data security breach from the pandemic unemployment assistance program in May, and that exposed, I think, 33,000 records or something like that. And Americans lost more than $97 million to COVID-19 stimulus check scams. So there's a lot of bad actors out there. So we have to think about what security is. So first of all, we need to define the difference between proactive security and reactive security. So let's look in the chat real quick to see how we can increase visibility to the community without being vulnerable to hackers. That's a really good point. That's what somebody wrote in the chat that they'd like to learn tonight. So we are definitely going to handle that question. So the difference between proactive security and reactive security. Well, if you're not doing anything to look for your security defenses and identify whether or not they really are truly doing their job, then you are in the mode of reactive security, which means that cyber attacks are going to happen, and then you will use your incident response plan to try to mitigate those. You'll be responding to threats instead of looking at them ahead of time and identifying where you can shore up some of your vulnerabilities. And so this is a very risky, reactive cybersecurity is very risky and very, very expensive. On the proactive side of security, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about the importance of security awareness training and having a security-minded culture. You're going to learn more about the compliance and regulatory requirements of New York State and other compliance requirements out there. And we're going to think about how we need to talk about cybersecurity. We need to have effective communication, and we need to make risk-based decisions, just like we make risk-based decisions in all of our business elements. So 2020, we've all talked about this. We had a year of change, but the one thing that we did notice is that technology became the backbone or the bottom line of every business. And so what we need to think about is, are those security, did we increase our security the same way we increased our technology? We all became a very remote society, but did we make sure that our security is following along in that same path? I was speaking with a business earlier today, and they were talking about how they hastily made some changes to their network back when COVID happened, and now would like to make sure that what they did is really the right thing. Their configurations are in the right mode, and they are protecting themselves. So it is true that we really need to stop and think about proactive security, because if we don't, then we're just in that reactive mode. Sometimes I will hear from folks in the community that cybersecurity is taken care of by their managed services provider or their IT person. And what I want to just make sure that I articulate this evening is that cybersecurity is different than your IT team. Cybersecurity is testing the measurements and identifying vulnerabilities. We're testing the defense. Your IT team's job is to set up those defenses. So if you think about your IT team, they're with you throughout the entire year. They're, setting up your workstations and servers and phones, and they're there when you have a problem, and they're making sure that everything is working and it's reliable. And then your security team is someone who comes in and they make sure that from a hacking standpoint, you have the defenses in place and you don't have well-known vulnerabilities or glaring weaknesses that could be exploited by an unethical hacker. And so I like to think of it this way. If your primary care physician is the same as your IT team, then we are your cardiologist. So your primary care physician takes care of you all year long, and then your cardiologist comes in once a year, they do their check, and then they go over the results of that EKG or whatever it is that you had done. Or your bookkeeper takes care of your books all year long, but once or twice a year, you meet with your accountant and you have that tax preparation, and you have those high-level meetings to talk about how your books are doing. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about how we are different than your IT team. So what we need to do is we need to outmaneuver cyber criminals. They are constantly changing. They love to circumvent any defenses that we put in place. And so when Zelvin Security is hired to simulate a real world style attack, we are quite often doing a penetration test, which means that we are giving a business a full on glimpse of what it would look like if their business was attacked. And so we are hired with proper paperwork in place to see how deeply we can move within an organization with very little information. So, as an example, a business will hire us and say, the last week in February is the week that we're going to do the test, let's say. And so we start out with doing some phishing because we all know that that's how most hackers get inside of organizations and businesses is through phishing. So now you thought that your business was really secure because you have a firewall and you have all these other defenses in place, right? All these little shiny boxes, bolt-on security. But then as soon as you opened up that phishing email, now that person is inside your organization. And they then have, if they asked you to submit your credentials in the web page, now they're inside your organization and they have the credentials. Now, once they're inside your firewall and they're inside your organization, they're going to map your network. They're going to figure out how many employees you have. So you have 6 employees or you have 25 employees. They're going to figure out what you have for a firewall, what kind of printers you have, what kind of cameras you use, how often you update them. They might even identify some other pieces of Internet of Things, which might be your badge system. They might even look on your camera system and watch people come and go. They'll look in your email, they'll look in your shared folders, they'll see all of your financials, and they'll have a really good sense of what's going on. Once they get inside that, into your folders, into your email, now when they send an email to another person within your organization, it really sounds like you because it really is just mirroring what you have already sent in the past, so they already know the type and tone of language that you use. So once they have those credentials, they begin to get other credentials within the business. Maybe they set up a keylogger to identify, the strokes that somebody might be typing on a regular basis, and then begin to move within the organization to get more and more keys to the kingdom, if you will. And so if this wasn't a malicious hack or if it was a ransomware attack, once that map is taken care of, and the hacker has a good idea of the inside of the organization, that's when they identify how much the ransom should be and when they should deploy that ransomware. Another type of test that is done to outmaneuver cyber criminals is if they are going to use vulnerabilities that are well known. So they're well known to you, they're well known to them. They will use those vulnerabilities to try to exploit something within your system. So let's say your cameras haven't been updated since the mid 80s. They will know that. And so if they can find a way inside your organization through your camera to exploit that, or some other vulnerability that you have even within your server or your system of some sort, then they will take advantage of that, exploit it, and then move within your organization. We can do a test to identify those well-known vulnerabilities and make sure that the fix has been secured. And hackers prefer to use phishing because humans are so much easier to trick than sophisticated equipment. Businesses spend lots and lots of money on sophisticated equipment, but if somebody can just simply ask you for your password and ask you to set it, put it inside of a email, it's much easier. So those are a couple of the different types of services that are out there to help keep everybody one step ahead of cyber criminals. So 96% of attacks in 2020 were phishing attacks. So ransomware as a service is basically an online portal for unethical hackers on the dark web to buy ransomware services. So these services that they buy are created by some really intelligent people, but that doesn't mean that everybody who's deploying ransomware is super keen and able to deploy these attacks without the ransomware as a service. So I always like to say that on the dark web, ransomware as a service is available like we buy toilet paper from Amazon. There's customer service, there's online chat, there's 24-hour customer care. It is a full-blown business on the dark web. And so that's why phishing attacks are so prevalent. And of course, as people start to realize, wow, if there's a ransomware attack, then they're going to, they're going to attack my system. I'm not going to be able to get in, so I better back up everything. And so you begin to start using your backups. And then, of course, hackers change their mode and begin to extort businesses with the data that they've compromised from the business, even if the ransom isn't necessary because you have a good backup. They still can hold you for ransom and post all of that compromised data, that PII, on the darknet. So remember I was saying that there are vulnerabilities, those well-known vulnerabilities. Well, in 2020, there were 17,400 new vulnerabilities that were deployed or identified throughout the year. And so when you have your computer updates that you're required to do, or your cell phone says there's a new update we're going to do in the middle of the night, that's because a new vulnerability has been identified. And so there's been a fix for it and you want to take care of it. But if your machine, or if your Internet of Thing, or your printer, or your camera, or your server is not updated as those new vulnerabilities are discovered, that's when hackers will leverage those and exploit them to gain access into your system. Just to say a note on phishing, there's a type of phishing attack called a spear phishing attack. And that's when someone goes out on the internet, maybe they will identify that a particular person in an organization is the person who pays all the bills or does the payroll or has a particular role. And they send a very keen and crafted message to that individual. So in June or July of 2019, there was a spear phishing attack on the city of Naples, Florida. And basically they did some research and realized that a utility company was hired to do some renovations on a project. And it was public information that they won the bid. And so a savvy, malicious attacker posed as an employee of the construction company and tricked the city employee into changing the bank account information to their own, and then sent an invoice, and they got a great payout. So that's an example of a spear phishing email attack. Sometimes what happens with that is hackers will use another type of attack in conjunction with the phishing attack. So they might use a vishing attack where they'll call on the phone, so voice, and they will say to the person from the city, by the way, I just wanted to let you know this new bank account information is coming over that way, you're expecting, and I didn't want you to be surprised. I know it's new and different than what we had talked about previously. And then the city employee recognizes that, oh, okay, this is coming. And so when the bank account change information comes in via email, they're not surprised and they actually take action. So we have to think about that. And 300 billion compromised credentials are out there on the dark net. They have been harvested from compromised sites, and hackers and bots use them to stuff them into other more valuable sites. So let me give you an example. For example, if somebody says to me, my wife's Instagram account was hacked, and next thing you know, not only did they have her Instagram account, but then they were in her bank account and they were in her whatever account. And it is very likely that that person was using the same password for their Instagram account as they were for their bank account. And so because hackers know that those credentials, if they're useful in one place, if they're used again, they can stuff them and then gain more sensitive information. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between compliance and security, because they're not the same thing, but I think sometimes in our mind, we use them interchangeably. So there are compliance requirements or there are security requirements. Well, if a jewelry store was only focused on compliance, then they would have a lock on the door, and they would expect that their jewels would all be in perfect condition every day and never be stolen, right? But if they are security minded, which they are, they would have several layers of security. So think about when you walk in a jewelry store, the bell rings on the door, there's cameras in all the corners, there's at least 2 employees. All of the jewels are in locked cases, and all of the bodices have beautiful jewelry on them, but they're completely filled, right? And so when you want to see a piece of jewelry, the jeweler takes it out and shows it to you. And when you're finished, they put it back. And that's how they keep track of all of their jewels. So that is a security mindset, not a compliance standpoint. And so if we're looking at our business from just a compliance standpoint, then we're basically using reactive security, not proactive security. So the New York State SHIELD Act, this is important. In March of 2020, when everything was changing in the world, this new New York State General Business Law was issued, and it pertains to all businesses in New York State and all businesses outside of New York State who hold data of New Yorkers. So the SHIELD Act stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security. And so basically it's expanding the definition of private information. It expands the definition of a data breach and the safeguards that are required to protect data. It has specific notification requirements, and right out of the gate has civic penalties in place for non-compliance. So who is required to participate or to comply with the SHIELD Act? Well, businesses with more than 50 employees, more than 3 million in annual revenue, or more than 5 million in year-end assets. So this applies to a huge number of businesses in New York State. It kind of fell at a bad time because we were all so preoccupied with COVID, but it really is important that businesses are taking this seriously. So there are 3 safeguards or security controls that a business must use. So from an administrative standpoint, the business must appoint a cybersecurity leader, or someone who manages the security awareness training program for the employees and also manages vendor security and is holding vendors to security safeguards by contract. So it's putting some words behind supply chain type attacks. The technical side of the SHIELD Act is saying that businesses must perform proactive cybersecurity tests of network and software, and businesses must detect, prevent, and respond to attacks. And from a physical standpoint, businesses must not hold on to private information longer than they should, and they should have a good chain of custody between transitions or when the business is sold from one organization to the other. So basically they're saying don't hold on to information too long, but don't get rid of it too soon, and take care of it when you have it in your possession. So the expanded definition of private information includes social security numbers, driver's license, account numbers, passwords, even biometric data, usernames, and security question answers. The interesting thing about this is sometimes people give up their private information on a questionnaire on social media that might ask you where you met your sweetheart, or what street you grew up on, or what's your sister's middle name. And the interesting thing is these are some of the same questions that are asked for security questions. And so on the dark web, anytime penetration testing company is doing a test, or somebody really wants to hack into your business, they're doing research or reconnaissance and building a dossier to help identify these questions, and are able to put a combination of maybe some of the information that is supposed to be kept private and some of this information that people just freely give by mistake on social media, and voila, it's a way that they can get into your system. So I'm happy to see that there is some requirements around data privacy. I think we're going to see more and more of this in the future for sure. And so here we are with the descriptions again about the administrative, technical, and physical requirements. I want to just mention that I am not a lawyer and I can't give you legal advice. So please go to the .gov website to read about the SHIELD Act and the law for itself. But I do definitely want you to spend some time understanding it and understand that someday I think more and more businesses are going to become required to adhere to it if they are not already. For the civil penalties for not complying with the SHIELD Act, here are some of the fines. So the maximum, the minimum, and so they're pretty hefty in requiring folks are identifying that they have actually lost information if a business is compromised. That they have notified the State Attorney General, the Department of Information Technology of New York State, the people impacted, and in some cases, the credit bureaus. So here's just another description, and we also have these handouts. This is an infographic that's on our website if you'd like to learn more. Like I said, I always point people to the primary source, so go to a .gov website and learn more about the SHIELD Act too. All right, so how do you protect your data? We've talked a little bit about some of these things. First of all, security awareness training. So SHIELD Act requires it. It just makes good sense. If you don't tell people what you need them to do, they don't necessarily know. And so we offer a security awareness training and actually have a grant with SBDC to be able to offer this to businesses who qualify under their requirements. And it's a 30-minute training. And what we like to handle in our security awareness training is password best practices, how to spot a phishing email. I love to talk about malware and attack types so that you know what to expect. And then every industry, as I mentioned before, manufacturing is 25% of ransomware attacks and healthcare is up in the number of attacks. I like to have some industry trends in there so that you can see in your neck of the woods what things look like. So security awareness training is very important for all users and not just those who happen to work on a computer right now. If you have some people who work for your organization, but you don't see them online at work, take the moment to give them some training because they can use this information at home. It is always helpful to have. And in the event that they're promoted, there's no lag time. They already know what your security awareness policies are, and you're starting to develop a culture of security awareness. So don't leave anybody out. Password manager. So how do you protect yourself? Well, using a password manager is the way that a lot of people maintain their passwords so that they're not falling victim to those credential stuffing attacks. And so what is a strong password? Well, it's 12 characters long. It's upper and lower case, numbers, and special characters. So when you're talking about 12 characters, now I'm going to tell you, you can't use any words in the dictionary and you can't walk down your keyboard and say FDSA, FDSA, or QWERTY, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so it makes it pretty hard to remember. And that's why as humans, we end up reusing our passwords. But if you're using a password manager, you can have 60 characters or 30 characters, and you won't have to necessarily remember it because your password manager is keeping track of all of those very secure passwords. They're keeping them in one place, and you're just remembering one very strong password for that password manager. But it's important to keep that password safe, very safe. Using two-factor authentication. So basically, when you enter your username and password, that's a single sign-on experience. But most banks these days are now offering two-factor. And so when you go to log on to your bank, it says, do you want me to send you a text message or you'll answer a security question? If you want to do the same thing with your email account, now when you're in the middle of a penetration test and we have to have multi-factor in order to get into your email account, if we're doing that phishing email, it takes us one extra step. And if you're using that multi-factor, we're looking for that code on your phone. We also have to get you to give us that code on the phone at the very same time. So it gets a little trickier, and the extra 10 seconds that it takes you to use two-factor authentication could be just the difference between keeping a hacker out of your network and not. So require vendor security. You have to do this. So if you think about way back when Target had their big hack, right? So the HVAC system was compromised because Target had pretty good security, and their vendor was able to access the point of sale systems, and that's where they got all that credit card data. The SolarWinds attack back in December, that's another type of supply chain attack. And if you think back to the SHIELD Act, now it's written that this is a requirement that vendors have security, and you're holding them to the level of security as it says in the contract. So remember that your security is only as strong as your weakest link. So if your computer happens to be super strong, but your cameras are managed by a third party are not, or your printer, then you still are vulnerable. So you really have to look at things from a holistic approach. Risk transference. So we're talking about cyber insurance here. It's a good place to start, but it's not the end all be all. If you think about having a 16-year-old and a new driver in your house, would you put that new driver behind the wheel of your brand new car without having a driver's license or any training? You wouldn't. And so if people are buying cybersecurity policies and they're not actually doing any risk-based testing to understand their defenses and configurations and really looking at their security from a proactive stance, then the cyber insurance will be needed, but it's very difficult to get the insurance companies to continue to write policies the more and more businesses who are using them and haven't really taken the proper steps to control the security posture in the first place. So there's already starting to be some changes on the cybersecurity policy questionnaire before it's granted, it's written. They'll say, how often do you do cybersecurity awareness training? Do you encrypt your computers at rest? They're asking all those questions. And then when a business has an attack and there's something that failed, but you've answered that it shouldn't have failed, then they're going to start looking into that. So I think you're going to see more and more of that in the news. So just pay attention to that and remember that it's just a good place to start. It's not the end all be all. So you really do have to measure your risks and look at things from an informed decision. You can't go into your cyber policy and cybersecurity posture with your eyes and ears covered. It doesn't work. You have to understand, where are your biggest gaps? Where are your little gaps? And spend time taking care of them appropriately. Attend security awareness training whenever you can, and bravo to you for being here now, because I think that that just shows how you already know that it's important to understand that there are risks out there and you have to be mindful of them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about spotting a phishing email, because phishing attacks are so prevalent. I really want you to see some of the ways in which you can look for clues when you receive an email message. So I'm going to click play and just listen carefully because the sound is a little low.
Let's look at a few ways that you can spot a phishing email. But first of all, consider your schedule. Are you in a rush right now? Are you trying to do one more thing before you walk out the door? Attackers love it when we're busy because we're more likely to make a mistake. So slow down. Does the email message require you to do something in a time-sensitive manner? Consider this a gift. It's a giant red flag. If there's an urgent message, it is usually phishing. Is the sender new to you? Have you ever met this person before? Does it sound like the person you normally communicate with? If not, that's a red flag. And then look for typos. Look for grammar mistakes or subtle mistakes that may turn you on to the fact that the message maybe was crafted by someone that you don't know, doesn't speak your language. Is the greeting specific to you? Or does it say, "Dear sirs, good morning, hello friend"? Those are all generic greetings, and those are also a red flag. Sometimes you'll receive an email message and it has an attachment. It'll tell you to open up the document. It looks like it is safe, but email message attachment extensions can be altered. so that you're not able to tell whether or not it's malware until after you open the message. So be very careful. If you do receive a link or an attachment in an email message, consider a no-click policy. Consider all email messages must not have links or attachments, or if they do, those links or attachments cannot be opened unless they've been properly verified. So how do you verify an email message with a link in it? Well, first of all, you take your email message, you hover on a link that you may have received, and in this case, the email message came from a company called SAM. When I hover on the hyperlink inside the email message, it'll tell me that it'll be pointing me to SAM. Go to a reputable domain name repository to be able to verify whether or not that domain name is actually the domain name you think it is. You're not being spooked. So go ahead and enter the domain name here in this search bar on this particular website to verify. It will tell you who SANS is or where you're going to be going. So this particular link would be going to sans.org. The email or the domain name was registered in 1995, which is a good sign. That was a long, long time ago. It is also originating in the U.S., and I know that SANS is located in this state, so that makes sense to me. Now, if you receive an email message from one of the businesses that you do work with on a regular basis, maybe you have a Discover card, don't click on the link inside the email. Take a moment and close out the email message, and then go ahead and log into your browser. Go ahead and log in through the internet your typical way instead of using the link that's within the email message itself. You want to verify whether or not your account has an activity or some alert has been given. And don't worry about calling someone to verify whether or not an email message is legitimate or not. Do it. Go ahead and call them. I'm sure they would love to hear from you. And remember, just because you received an email message doesn't mean that you have to do anything with it. If you don't know the person and there was a red flag within it, go ahead and just delete it. Get rid of that phishing email. If the person had something urgent, I expect that they would be giving you a call to find out the answer to whatever it is that they're asking. And if you think you've become a victim of phishing, please contact your IT professional or your supervisor. Thank you for your attention. Let's look at it.
So bad news never gets better with time. So if you have clicked on something, please let someone know. So let's talk a little bit about typo squatting or using a fake email or a fake web page. I just want to go over this because it's a very important point.
Let's say you receive an email to attend a training session. In the email, there is a link. When you open up the web page, you expect it to look like this. But what if you open the web page and it looks like this? The only difference is this particular domain name has an extra E, which is then routing you through the hacker website. It looks like you're logging in to the program you expect to go to. However, it is not the authentic page. This is a spoofed web page, an excellent way for hackers to gain your credential information, also your financial information.
Okay, does that make sense? So we have to verify where the links are coming from so that we know whether or not it's a domain name that's been altered with just a simple typo. So verifying potential email messages. I just want to talk about this because it's such an important point. There are repositories out there where you can enter the domain name. And so if I enter Zelvin Security, it will tell me when it was recorded, where it's located. It'll tell me who owns the website. And this is a great tool because now you can start to do a little bit of your own reconnaissance on the messages that you're receiving. It's very handy to use. So I just want to wrap up. So we talked about the difference between proactive security. We talked about the New York State SHIELD Act and why that's important and the technical safeguards that they're requiring us all to adhere to. And then we talked about some practical ways that we can reduce risks. And of course, we talked about some of the trends that we're seeing this year. So I just want to wrap up by telling you a little bit more about security testing options, because when you're holding your vendors against a security posture, you're going to want to know the differences between the different types of tests, because there's a cybersecurity risk assessment, which is basically an online tool, and the person who is completing the assessment doesn't necessarily have to have a technology-based background. They're answering questions about an organization. If you are not doing this for your own organization, please let me know, and I would be happy to point you to some resources, even some free resources that are out there on the internet. So if a business is telling you that they are doing risk assessments, or they're doing something and they use the word risk and the word assessment in it, then you know that it's really basically a narrative of the person who is completing that report. If they're saying that they do a vulnerability assessment, they're looking for those 17,000 vulnerabilities that were discovered in 2020, and they're doing that check for those. And so they're really taking care of some of the low-hanging fruit that hackers would use to exploit an organization to get inside. If they're saying that they do third-party penetration testing, bravo. That means that they are looking for a third party to really test these defenses, look to make sure that these vulnerabilities are secure, but there also aren't other manual-based vulnerabilities that could be exploited with an ethical hacker and a keyboard. And then if a business tells you that they are doing red team engagements, then they are then testing the defenses of their internal teams to see whether or not they can respond to an attack in real time. So keep in mind that these different levels of security testing really do make a difference, and just don't be fooled by the different words. Make sure that you understand the definitions. I like to use this honeycomb chart to identify the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. So a penetration test either could be with or without credentials, and it includes manual testing and deep diving, social engineering, so phishing and vishing, and visiting on site to see if we can tailgate somebody into the organization. And the goal is to exploit vulnerabilities and elevate our privileges to get as many keys to the kingdom as possible, and hopefully all of the keys to the kingdom, including become the IT director and domain administrator. A vulnerability assessment is looking for those well-known vulnerabilities, but not exploiting them. So just identifying them, and this tool-based type of test is usually less time-consuming than a penetration test, and is sometimes really helpful for organizations if they've never done any type of testing, but this penetration test is sort of the gold standard. And so here you can see sort of in this arrow, from the bottom, the middle, and then the upper end. So I just wanted you to be educated on those types of different types of tests, so that when someone says something to you, you know what they're talking about. And so not only would they do a security test because you require them to, but now you know that they have a risk-based priorities within their organization, and they have a culture that is looking for vulnerabilities. They want to preserve customer trust, and if that's what they want to do, then that's probably a good person to do business with. They also value the money that they've put into their organization, because cyber attacks are expensive. And because they're testing all the time, they know that cyber risks evolve. I always say we're never done getting better, because we're not. This is a journey. And they may have to because they have some sort of compliance requirement. But remember what I told you about the difference between compliance and security. They're not the same thing. So if I had a list of things, and if you're making a list about what you want to do this year, you want to, end 2021 with a win. What are the 3 wins that you want to make sure that you conquer? Well, first of all, hands down, you want to make sure you train your employees. If you don't tell them what to know, they won't know. So build a culture of training and talk about cyber attacks. I always say socialize it. When you get a phishing email, message your friends and say at work and say, I got a phishing email. They must think I'm silly because I I didn't click on it. And that way everybody else knows that you got one. And that way they can be looking out for it and won't make a mistake. Business owners are requiring risks are measured and reduced. So you're really looking at your vulnerabilities. You're testing yourself and looking for them so that you can improve your security posture every year. You might not be able to handle or take care of every single risk out there because you just can't replace every single appliance. But what are the most important appliances to take care of, and how do you reduce your risk in a prioritization? And then number 3, hold your vendors accountable. It doesn't cost you another penny for your vendors to also have good, strong security practices. And remember, supply chain attacks or vendor security, you're only as strong as your weakest vendor. So those are the 3 wins that I would look for in 2021 moving forward. And the testing trends that we have noticed. Many businesses are doing those vulnerability assessments. They're doing them both on the inside and the outside of their organization because they want to see where those gaps are. Web application penetration testing is happening a lot more often because we all recognize that most data is inside of a web application, and it becomes a magnet for hackers. If you keep all of your client data or resident data in one particular place, well, that's where a hacker wants to go. And then the other testing trend that we're noticing is businesses are saying, please do a internal deep dive penetration test, because we know that at some point in time, somebody's going to click on a phishing email and the adversary will find a way in. So what do we do to make sure that we are as secure as possible if that should happen? So that concludes my presentation this evening. I would like to open it up for questions. And if you'd like, you'll have to put them in the chat since everybody is muted. So I'm just going to turn to the chat. While we're waiting for a question to come in, I just wanted to say one of the questions that we got earlier today was, does the SHIELD Act apply to private businesses and municipalities? I thought that was a really good question. So the New York State SHIELD Act applies to both businesses and municipalities. There's a similar general business law in Massachusetts and California, and I believe the Massachusetts law actually omits municipalities within the requirement, but the New York State SHIELD Act does not. Let's see. All right, so how do I feel about a particular password manager? So I can't just give general advice, but I can tell you that there are many organizations out there that have very good password managers. And I would say if you're using a well-known, reputable company, you're on the right track. Another question that somebody asked earlier was, can you give us a rough idea of the costs involved in a cost of a test? And I just want to say, we have never found an organization that we can't figure out a way to build a plan so that it's affordable. We always create a custom proposal for businesses so that they can sort of address security where they are within their particular organization. Another question that came in earlier today was, does our business perform security tests and assessments as well as provide hourly services? And we do provide hourly services. Sometimes we're just asked to speak to a board of directors because they have questions about security. We do have a nonprofit rate. So if you happen to fall in the nonprofit category, we certainly like to help you. And the reason why we do that is, this is where we are from, and this is our backyard, so we want to take care of the organizations within our neighborhoods. And I think those were all of the questions, and I think I've answered all of the questions in the chat. So I think that concludes today's webinar. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for your time, and if you have questions, please reach out We're not strangers. Our telephone number is listed here. Like I said, we're just below Syracuse. Don't Google or don't go on the web and try to find an ethical hacking firm. You want to make sure that the group that you're using is reputable, and we will point you in the right direction and give you as many online resources that are reputable as possible and help you in any way we can. So I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.